Governance Network. Our guest today, we're very pleased to say, is Terrence Campbell, a businessman and the head of the Partnership for National Unity Parliamentary Delegation. I am your host, Anand, appearing in a guest capacity for the OGGN. We're pleased to have you tuning in. OGGN, just for background purposes, was founded in the summer of 2017 and is comprised of Guyanese at home and abroad. It is also a registered 501c3 nonprofit in New York. OGGN recognizes that oil will feature prominently in Guyana's future for decades to come, which is why it is committed to thinking long-term. OGGN's mission is to advocate for the rule of law, environmental protection, and strict financial norms when it comes to oil exploration and production in Guyana. Whether you're listening locally or in the diaspora, OGGN's goal is to keep you informed and educated. OGGN is independent with no political affiliation and actively advocates for transparency, accountability, and good governance. Today's topic is keeping the government of Guyana accountable. And we want to discuss this in relation to the role of the opposition. We often hear about the responsibility of the government in the management of oil and gas, the economy. Their failures, the lack of accountability, acquiescence to ExxonMobil. But what about the responsibility of the opposition? They have 29 seats in parliament, and the leader of the opposition has constitutional roles and power. And so we're very pleased to have Mr. Campbell here today to answer some of these questions. And I want to dive straight into the questions, and then Mr. Campbell can then respond. Mr. Campbell, you are the head of the APNU parliamentary delegation, 16 strong, 12 strong. Explain to listeners why, following the budget, there have been no sittings of parliament and key committees are still to be set up to enable the functioning of the entire parliament and the role of the opposition. Aren't you and your parliamentarians feeling in their responsibility here?
So, Anand, thanks for having me on the program. And I won't dive straight into the question. I will do a sidebar in terms of welcoming you to what seems to be a new role. I know traditionally you've been a man in the press, in the printed press, and it's good to see you in this new audiovisual role with OGGN. So welcome. And at least from your introduction, you seem to have taken to it like a duck to water. Yes, there have been no sittings of parliament or any parliamentary committees since the budget. And I think we can reasonably infer that the only reason that Parliament was summoned was to pass the budget itself. Two committees were formed, the Committee of Selection and the Business Subcommittee of the Committee of Selection. And this was just to advance the work of the budget. That's it. there was no intention, there clearly was no intention for any other committees to be formed. The committee, the lack of sittings of parliament affects us in the opposition because every fourth sit-in is a sit-in that's dedicated to the issues raised by opposition members. We have raised, I personally have raised questions that have received spurious answers. There was one where with the Ministry of Agriculture, I remember it offhand, but related to the poultry sector. And I was asking about countries, and they answered in relation to individuals. Questions are struck down as violation of the standing orders. And interesting that this is from the Oil and Gas Network. I actually drafted the very first submission sent to the clerk was an amendment to the National Resource Act, which I personally drafted. And as far as I know, I have not received any communication. I may have missed it, but I have not received any communication that that particular amendment has been addressed by the speaker. So other questions have been addressed, other questions to myself, other parliamentarians, and so on. But the very, very first item submitted, an amendment to the National Resource Act, has not been addressed by the speaker. So if the longer that there are no sittings of parliament, it becomes more, and if this continues for 5 years, then issues that the opposition wants to raise will have a steep hill to climb in terms of getting to parliamentary debate. So from that standpoint, I'm very concerned. Secondly, from the committee standpoint, I am concerned that in particular, and this is not the only one, but in particular, the Public Accounts Committee, whose work I am told, and you would know that I'm new to Parliament, and I believe that I am told that the work of the last committee stopped in 2019. So we have 2019, maybe 2020, all the way to 2025. This is the period, we're now entering the period of governance of this PPP government from 2020. And so there's no opportunity for that committee to do its work because that committee too has not been formed. Several of my colleagues have raised this issue. I believe it's also been raised at the APNU press conference about the fact that the committees have not been formed and hence not functioning. So we are most unhappy about this. Outside of that, the members of parliament have been busy and we've been using other media, notwithstanding the loss of the Starbuck News, to address issues that occur, but addressing those issues via the social media or via newspapers or via radio, or even via this program, is not the equivalent of getting a minister in Parliament to answer questions truthfully, before parliamentarians and the national audience. So we are extremely concerned about this.
Right. And so what is to be done? Because clearly this can't continue, but it may also reflect a complete obstinacy on the part of the government. That is, they would like to do things at their own pace. They know that there are things that they could be called upon to explain in Parliament, and they're trying to avoid that. Surely that can't be the kind of Parliament that we voted in the last election. Surely they must recognize the right to have members day every 4 weeks and recognize the right to have motions presented, questions asked, and bills presented. So clearly what should be done by the opposition, together or individually, APNU, WIN, Forward Guyana, clearly something has to be done rather than just sitting back and waiting for the speaker to say something. For example, I noticed the speaker and some of the government parliamentarians went to an Inter-Parliamentary Union event in Turkey. I am not aware whether or not the opposition was invited, but clearly you can't be attending an International Parliamentary Union when you've simply closed off work in your own parliament.
And I agree with you. The international, I think we did speak to that issue. Various MPs have spoken to that same issue. they will claim that the Interparliamentary Union delegation has been decided upon based on previous membership, etc. But it is ironic that we are going, and it's not the first trip by the Speaker to such a meeting since this Parliament was formed. I believe he was out in December or January in Turkey in relation to a similar event. I think it's ironic that the parliament, those parliamentarians, especially from the government side, would attend such events, even as they refuse to call parliament. And then you would recognize that the courts have historically limited, taking the view that they have limited power to interfere into the operations of parliament. So the litigation in this particular instance has its limits. It's not like if a government official does not function, we go for judicial review or something, or so that is not. It's not ruled out as an option, but it's a steep hill to climb, likely to be unsuccessful. I think what has to happen is a wider call by a united opposition, which has its own challenges at the moment. A wider call by a united opposition, and to engage those foreign powers that have historically paid some attention to Guyana. We recall in January, I think all of the ABCEU issued calls for the election of a leader of the opposition, which was something that then followed. So, at some point, we need to discuss the situation and to move to ask external agencies, perhaps, to exercise moral suasion on the government of Guyana.
Right. I'll come to that question again later. And I just point out that it was actually a question from Starbuck News that triggered a response from the British High Commissioner. And then that was followed by the Canadian High Commissioner, the US Ambassador, and the EU. So actually, the newspaper was able to help that process along the way. But we'll discuss that later. I would also make the point here that, what about civil society? The private sector seems, and of course you are, a businessman, the private sector seems so very comfortable with just simply going along with the government narrative and showing no interest at all in, for example, the fact that Parliament hasn't met for months. And surely the private sector recognizes the importance of Parliament meeting and infusing stability and confidence in the economy. But as long as they're in with the government and feel comfortable with that, they're not seeing anything.
So one of the difficulties here in Guyana is the fact that a number of civil society is weak and is not exercising the role that one would expect in a healthy democracy. Let me go on, just divert a little bit and say it is the same of the media, and especially with the loss of Starbuck News. It has become, it's interesting that politics in Guyana has now become that where we can depend on the media to do a lot of investigations and so on. And with the loss of Starbuck, it's become a little more important now for even politicians to become journalists. It has come to the point where we actively have to have sources telling us what is happening, going out, investigating, and reporting. But to the specific question of the private sector, so civil society is essentially weak. Even trade unions have been emasculated in the country. But to the specific question of the private sector, I have long stated, I've been a member of the private sector. I've been an entrepreneur in the private sector for decades. My companies have been members of the Guyana Manufacturing Services Association and the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce. But that does not, and I have numerous friends in the private sector, friends of long standing, but that has never stopped me from saying that the private sector has been politically captured. And politically captured by the PPP. I mean, let me be very specific, because when the PPP is out of power, the private sector is extremely vocal. When the PPP is in power, the private sector goes silent. So it is sad, but we should not expect any help from the private sector because it's politically captured, and civil society because it's extremely weak in Guyana, and it's something that we need to address. But there are few people, if you're in civil society, Anand, if you're in civil society, there are times when you're going to have to speak truth to power. And most people in Guyana fear the having to speak truth to power. So even if it was not a private sector organization, and let's say it's an organization like Policy Forum, Guyana, and so on, which has been closed off from the Extractive Industries Transparency Index, ET, people are scared to join, even Transparency International. People are scared to join those organizations because the minute you have to speak truth to power, meaning speak truth to this government or call on them to hold parliament, there will be a backlash on your job, on your business, on your family, and so on. So we cannot, in this call, I don't think we can expect, which is the reason that I jumped to the foreign agencies, because I don't think we can expect much domestic help that's non-political, maybe outside of the trade unions, that's non-political in terms of calling on the government to hold parliament.
All right. I want to switch gears here a little bit and discuss the situation in Region 10, where we don't have a regional chairman appointed as yet, based on the last election result. At the last general election, We Invest in Nationhood scored a historic win over APNU in Region 10. Since October 10th last year, the Regional Executive Officer, Dwight John, has refused to convene another meeting of the Regional Democratic Council. That meeting, if it was held, is believed would enable WIN to hold chairmanship of the council, as Forward Guyana has already pledged its seat. Now, what is APNU's role here? Is it that there's collaboration between APNU and the PPP to prevent this meeting from being held? Why isn't APNU making more fuss about this? The fact that the will of the people of Region 10 has not been expressed. I think you recently attended Linden Town Day. I'm sure, obviously, you're trying to draw up support and trying to show APNU's presence. But clearly, shouldn't you be concerned that the will of Region 10 has not been expressed as it relates to the election of the chair and the deputy chair? And those are two of the most important positions in the region. Now, what is APNU's position there now?
First, let me say that I will not venture to set out APNU's position on this issue, because it is not strictly a parliamentary matter. And secondly, it is something that's being handled by other actors within the APNU. So, but let me contextualize as far as I can some of what you said, add some context. One, there were discussions between the APNU and WIN. Those discussions did not lead to an agreement. I personally risked political capital and lost political capital by stepping into those discussions. And I was unsuccessful in bringing about some kind of an understanding. And I will say that the major issue on which there was lack of movement was the sharing of the spoils in Region 10. specifically, Win refused, and I have put evidence in the public domain to this effect, that Win refused to offer the APNU the vice chairmanship in Region 10. There were other issues, there were other regions at play, but let's leave those aside for now. That would just complicate the discussion. So this impasse could have been avoided if an agreement was struck. Let me jump ahead for a second and say also that there was similar reluctance to have sharing of the spoils during the debates as it relates to the speaking time of shadows. All right? Proportionately, we would have asked for, I think, eight shadow ministries. One would have gone to Forward Guyana. That would have been 8 and 1, 9. And I think 20, sorry. There were 20 ministries. And so we would have asked 8, 11 to Win and 1 to Forward Guyana. We weren't able to strike an agreement. So if an agreement had been struck in relation to the chairman and vice chairman, the sharing of the spoils, we would not be having this particular discussion today. Now, there was an election for the chairman, and it was not as clear cut as you were trying to make it out, Anand, because we saw a situation where Win, I think, got 9 seats. The APNU's candidate got 9 seats as well. And there are questions as to where that other vote came from.
Right.
So it is not, let me say this without, I don't want to delve too far into this. It is not as straightforward as it would seem that because Win has 9, that they would automatically win the vice chairmanship. They do require 1 more.
Right.
I believe Forward Guyana has said that they will support. But what happens if there's a defection from Win? Right?
Okay.
But let me go on 1 second. Let me go on to the issue of the chairman. I personally believe that democracy is undermined by the delay. I said personally believe in having a chairman and elected for the regional council. That regional council, we've had the budgets, and that regional council, that chairman and vice chairman and so on would not have been consulted. But this government is not enthusiastic about consulting anyone. They didn't consult with the opposition parties. I don't think they consulted with the trade unions, or at least trade unions not supportive of them. But democracy is undermined by the delay. And the faster it's fixed, the better.
Right. So, I mean, I just want to point out, you said you lost political capital by trying to get a deal between Win and APNU. But the failure of that attempt should not have led to the kind of stalemate that occurred, because clearly the election should have gone ahead. And the fact that the REO has not called it clearly showed that the PPP is prepared to sort of allow the status quo so it can control through the REO and whoever it is it has influence over. So that even if you didn't strike a deal, surely that should play second fiddle to the need to get the chair and the deputy chair elected based on the results. So I'll just make that point.
Well, let me say that politically it became very difficult because forces aligned to Win came out just before the election to announce that the APNU, or that they didn't say, I don't think they said the APNU, it's PNC and the PPP are gone together. And you did allude to this a bit in your questioning, right? That the PNC and the PPP are now together. And I believe there may have been a Stabrook, it was either a Stabrook editorial or a Kite Show editorial that said, Win has been able to do what no one else has been able to do before. The PNC and the PPP are together.
Mm.
No such thing takes place, at least not as far as I know, and under no circumstances will I engage in a PNC or an APNU to decide to form an alliance with the PPP.
Mhm.
But forces allied to win came out to push that narrative, and that was not helpful. Again, it was not helpful to opposition unity, opposition cooperation. I believe it impacts that even to this day.
Right.
The
Okay.
fact that let me say the fact that you even asked the question and suggested it
Mhm.
shows that it is impacting it to this day.
It does. If listeners are just joining us now, you're watching OGGN's podcast. This show is being brought to you by the Oil and Gas Governance Network, which comprises Guyanese here and in the diaspora. More Guyana oil-related material can be found on www.oggn.org. Members of the audience can give OGGN a thumbs up or like on the KN Facebook page or the KN YouTube page. The topic today is keeping the government of Guyana accountable, and we're pleased to have Terrence Campbell as our guest. So, Terrence, I want to switch now to the last budget. In the budget debate in Parliament, Finance Minister Ashley Singh more or less mocked the opposition for what he said was not speaking substantively on the oil and gas sector, which is, of course, the dominant part of the economy for now and the future. How do you respond? Do you think that you did a sufficient job as it relates to speaking on oil and gas matters, given its importance to the economy?
Let me say that I can't speak about the Win Party or for Guyana. I can speak to the APNU parliamentary delegation. We did, I remember MP Sharma Solomon calling for all contracts in relation to gas, the energy, to be placed in the public domain. And I believe that I would have addressed some issues in relation to the Natural Resource Fund. But we were, and again, this is politics, our hands were tied. And I have to go back to the issue of the shadows. We were originally offered 5 shadows, which we felt was inadequate. It was not based on proportionality. The same thing may have happened with the committee assignments whenever they come up, but that has a specific formula. Now, we rejected the offer of 5, and then we were reduced to 2, myself being the finance shadow, and the Honorable Dexter Todd to be the shadow of the Attorney General. And we also rejected that on a matter of principle that the entire team had not been treated fairly. So we were, MP Sharma Solomon is the shadow for natural resources. And so in the space of 15 plus 5 minutes, he was tasked to deal with mining, forestry, oil and gas, Region 10, sand quarrying, all in the space of 15 plus 5. So it would have been difficult in that period and with the limitations in terms of time for us to properly address the issue of oil and gas. I will return to it maybe later this week, because there was an interesting point in that debate when I questioned the Honorable Prime Minister about, because I think I specifically laid out the case either in Parliament or just before, that the choice of Wales had been a political choice and not a choice made based on feasibility studies and so on. In fact, under the APNU government, I think Clonbrook was the original choice for landing the the pipeline, and with a total cost of about 800 million, and we now way over 2 billion. Right. So I think I laid out the case previously, and when you consider parliamentarians now, Anand, you've got to consider both what we say in Parliament, which is limited because Parliament is rarely called, and what we say outside the Parliament, what we say maybe in our letters to the newspaper, what we say on our social media pages, what we say in press conferences, what we say in interviews like this.
Mm-hmm.
So I specifically, so one, the choice was political to my mind. Secondly, there is an issue, and you know this, that a lot of costs have been driven up because of poor soil, right?
Yeah.
And I think I lured the Prime Minister, and I will return to it soon in a video release, maybe over the next 2 weeks, maybe even before the end of this week.
Mm-hmm.
Where I said to the Prime Minister, I said, listen, I have put up buildings and had soil problems, which is true, right? And I said, so feel free to let us know what happened. And he came up and he said, and I got to get his exact words. He said something, because we care about the Guyanese people, we had a second soil test done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The problem, Anand, with them, and to this day, I don't know if they ever revealed it. Maybe I missed it. You've been very close to, much closer to the action than I have been. They have never released a feasibility test, a feasibility study for the oil and gas, the gas to energy project. That has never been released. I've never seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Second, I believe that the soil test that was done originally was not done properly.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the reason we ended up in, part of the reason we ended up in this massive problem that we have.
Okay.
He admitted to it in Parliament, and I have asked my PR people to go back and pull back that, because I'll tell you something that happened when he admitted to it.
Mm-hmm.
Anand got up at that point and walked out.
Yeah,
I don't think he was happy, right?
Yeah. But once it's there in Hansard, you have it there, so it's really just to go back. All right. So just let me just briefly.
Hold on. Let me finish this. Mm-hmm. So within the limited time, we have addressed issues that we wanted to draw out on oil and gas. And even though it's long past the budget, so many things have been going on. I mean, including Marudi, you'd have seen me out there fighting with them. Yeah. I will go back to that specific clip and link it to everything that has subsequently taken place and the escalation of costs and the awards and so on.
Okay, right. So we'll go back into some more detail there. I just want to ask briefly, how would you describe the state of your relationship with the leader of the opposition, considering you have to discuss all of these things? You know, shadows, committee compositions, maybe a joint strategy on things like oil and gas. How would you describe your relationship with the leader of the opposition?
One word, poor.
And okay, so who has to improve that, you or him? Both.
I think it falls on both. And this is a matter, you know, let me speak broadly to this, because I think at a press conference 2 weeks ago, Honorable Dexter Todd spoke to the issue of win and mutual respect and so on. Let me say that, and I'll speak personally to this. At 62 years of age, I'm only in politics because I fear that my legacy to Guyana will be that I have left it just in the way that I met it. For that to change, for my legacy to improve, the PPP must go in 2030. And for the PPP to go in 2030, it is absolutely necessary that we have a broad coalition of all opposition parties to achieve that. So the current situation in terms of relationships is poor, but it has to improve, and we must. There's a responsibility on all of us to move in that direction. I do believe, though, that with the challenges, extra parliamentary challenges of the Win leadership, once that is settled, then whichever way. I'm not saying I want to be clear. I'm not predicting or wishing any direction. I'm saying that when one has those challenges, maybe it becomes difficult to really focus on all of these things like, opposition unity and so on.
Okay, I want to address the Natural Resource Fund. It is a repository of the country's oil wealth, and you were on one of its subcommittees, and you objected to the way things were handled. In December 2024, you described it as a rubber stamp. In December 2025, you said the government had spent 89% of the oil proceeds that had been earned between September 2024 and September 2025.
12-month period, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I think you mentioned that you had made some submission to Parliament. What has to change in the NRF legislation? Because that really is sort of like the clearinghouse for all of the money that this country is receiving, and the money that should be properly designated in terms of how it's being spent. So it's enormously important. And the PPP's line is, oh, we've improved NRF legislation, even though their legislation allows them to take large amounts, and they expanded the amounts of money they can take. And of course, they've derided the Appling plus AFC model, which was then thrown out of Parliament. So what, in your estimation, given that you were on the investment committee at one point, what in your estimation needs to be done to improve the Natural Resource Fund legislation?
First of all, I think there's need for national discussion about the Natural Resource Fund. And it ought to address infrastructural needs. I would be a dumb businessman if I said that we don't need to be spending any money on infrastructure. I will say we need to spend money on infrastructure. We need to construct quality infrastructure. And the infrastructure that we construct must be transparent processes. And allow me to jump again to gas the energy and to put in a punch. Linskaya is there, ill qualified for the task at hand, and now emerging into the public domain are stories about subcontractors who, with one might say, tarnished histories. So we need to have this national discussion. What do we want to put to infrastructure? I believe that infrastructure must be paced, and the infrastructure we must also decide on infrastructure that is focused on expanding the non-oil economy. And I could throw some weird examples that have been passing through my mind, like, bridges to open massive new agricultural areas and in remote places, and tunnels through the mountains, and crazy things that I dream at night, right? I'm not saying that they are feasible. You then have to go to feasibility and say, well, what's going to happen here? So we need to decide how much we want to put in the pot for infrastructure, how much we want for economic stabilization, is in case there is a shock, how much we want for intergenerational equity. That then needs to be codified and the legislation amended. Even the amendment to the legislation that I submitted did not address those issues. It just asked for more clearer reporting on where the oil money goes, because as you know, Anand, it's thrown into the consolidated fund, right? And there it becomes a pepper pot. Mm-hmm. You really can't tell what is going where. Our tax revenues are recurrent revenues. Somewhat. They're tied to the oil and gas. If oil and gas went, tax revenues will fall. But basically, tax revenues are fairly predictable. They will continue. We will have tax revenues long after you and I are fertilizing daisies. Mm-hmm. What will not necessarily be around is oil and gas. Mm-hmm. Because even recent reports point to a surge in terms of solar as far as electricity generation is concerned. And I was shocked by that. I was shocked by that because we know the current US administration is not as focused on renewable sources and has been pushing in every other direction, to stay with fossil fuels. And notwithstanding all of that, we just saw the report that says, listen, solar has jumped in a big way. And if I might quote the US administration, bigly, as a source of electrical power. Right. So as far as oil and gas is concerned, this is not a renewable resource. So I think we need to focus on it and see what I think the people of Guyana want to know, that if the funds from this resource is not renewable, they want to know, what is it that how are we spending this money? What are we spending it on? So that it will be around to continue generating for generations to come, which is what the Norwegians have done. They've used their oil money, set up this massive sovereign wealth fund, that even when oil is gone, that's going to be providing for the Norwegian people for generations to come. We need to do something similar. So even the amendment that I put in place did not address that issue, simply because I knew that would not fly with the PPP. And, I put something that would there, but we need to have a national conversation about this. And the legislation needs to be amended. You pointed out that the PPP in their first amendment, I think in 2021 or 2022, had set a cap of around 75% for withdrawals. And then when they got a taste of the money, it was so sweet. In 2024, they passed an amendment taking it up into the 90s.
Right. So you need a national conversation that leads to a plan. What you have at the moment is a formula that is being expanded by the PPP. Money is being taken into the consolidated fund, no real accountability for it. So that's what has to change. And so really, again, it's what role Parliament can play in this and what role the opposition can play in this.
Right. I remember, too, even before the start of my parliamentary career, since last year, we filed a case in relation to that, a case that was heard and was slated for decision in October, then slated for decision in December, then slated for decision in January, and I don't know when we're ever going to have a decision.
So that is a separate issue to judiciary. Maybe we'll get a chance to. So I want to ask at this point, because I want to ask about a series of things as it relates to oil and gas. Who is APNU's chief spokesperson on oil and gas?
That would be Sharma Solomon, who is the MP for Natural Resources, and under him, that's where you'll find oil and gas.
I want to ask for clarity on a series of things in relation to oil and gas, and obviously you'll use your own experience to sort of to address these. The first I wanted to get to, because it's been an area of some confusion, that is the question of renegotiation of the 2016 production sharing agreement, which of course was the product of the APNU plus AFC government. Where do you, as a leader of your parliamentary bloc, and APNU stand on that PSA at this stage?
You're taking me into it is. I would not want to venture too much into that, because that is something that we have discussed these issues, but we have not released a position, and I'll take them one by one. We have not released a position, an official position on those issues. So I do not want to jump ahead of my parliamentary colleague and of the party to speak to this. But I think the general feeling is that the PSA could be improved so that the country gets more benefits from oil. The PPP has introduced a new PSA. I don't think we have made any fines, oil fines those contracts were only finalized. They were long delayed. They only finalized recently. So it'll be some time before there will be a fine and we benefit from that new PSA. But the party has not set out a position, and I would not want to jump ahead on that PSA or as yet.
Okay, I understand. But let's say, for instance, like a 2% royalty rate. Is it that, okay, you can at least say that that should be significantly improved? And this whole question of Exxon Mobil and its partners paying taxes as opposed to the government paying on behalf of these oil companies.
I would say that all of those issues, the royalty rate, the limits on the cost bank, ring fencing, all of those things, my party would be willing to re-examine in a broad re-examination rather than just specific items. But I would not want to jump out and say what
Okay.
the parties.
Okay.
Where it's possible on these questions, I may offer personal opinion, try to contextualize it, but I do not want to jump ahead
Okay.
of the party's position.
All right. So you can give your personal opinion on this.
Yeah.
The unlimited parent company guarantee to cover the potential oil spill. We had this, of course, decision by Justice Sandil Kisoon, which was then opposed by Exxon, and the government actually joined in helping Exxon to oppose this requirement. Now, is that something that you would say that we definitely need, a parent company guarantee against an oil spill?
So I started my career in insurance. I remain a chartered insurance practitioner. I remember well Exxon Valdez.
Mm-hmm.
I remember well the blowout in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, the Deepwater Horizon. Yes.
Right. And I am not comforted by the current arrangements to cover in relation. This is a personal position. I'm not comforted by the current arrangements for covering oil spills. I believe much more should be demanded of Exxon, and I believe Exxon is quite capable of providing much more comfort to the Guyanese public, either by way of an unlimited parent company guarantee or greater amounts of insurance.
Okay, what about the absence of a petroleum commission? This is one of the things that had been promised by the PPP when it came back into office in 2020. They have failed to deliver over 5+ years. And of course, this petroleum commission is important for the management sector. That is, the commission takes charge of the entire gamut of legislative and other matters. What is your position there?
Is that a rhetorical question? We have a petroleum commission. The name is Barra Jagdeo.
All right, yeah. Maybe we need something that's more formal. Tied to...
No. Yeah. I support, and I believe I've called in at least one press conference for the establishment of a petroleum commission, truly made up of various experts, legal, environmental experts, and financial experts, who will oversee the development of that sector. I support the establishment of a petroleum commission 100%.
Okay, and this issue of oil depletion, let's say, for example, if we are extracting, we're close to 900,000 barrels a day now, should we consider what is known as an oil depletion policy? That is, we don't have to take it all out now. I mean, it's a non-renewable resource, it'll be there. It's in a several block. We'll have the geologics on where things are located. We don't have to all take it out. We don't have to run to Exxon's melody. They may want 10 platforms, but we could say, no, we're okay with the risk related to 6 because we think we're taking out enough oil for our economy. We have to take account of climate needs and so forth. What should be our position there?
I believe we need an oil, and again, this is personal. I believe we need an oil depletion policy, but it should be contextualized by where we see the energy market going in 10, 20, 30 years. There will be an inflection point in the oil market at some point, and I refer to the growth in renewables, right? And there will become an inflection point at which demand will start to slow. I think that as a country, we need to avail ourselves of the best experts and the best information on this. It's never going to be accurate, well, 100% accurate. But with that information in hand, together with clear estimates on what our reserves are, because that seems to become a secret of what really are our reserves. I think with some of that information, then we can feed into a depletion policy. So there should be a depletion policy, but let us not forget that we have come to oil production towards what I have no doubt is the end of King Oil, right? Whether the king dies in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, the king is going to go, right? So we should take all of that into consideration and then work. That should inform the depletion policy.
Okay. OGGN is also concerned about the dumping of millions of barrels of what you call produced water from the oil platforms, which are contaminated water, and which, of course, has the impact of impacting on deep sea flora and fauna. Is that something that APNU and yourself are concerned about?
Again, I wouldn't want to venture to represent APNU's position. My own position on it would be that, oil production comes with some of these bad effects, negative environmental effects. Those effects, we have to make sure, and I don't believe that that our EPA as currently structured works to minimize the damage through produced water or even through flaring. And you will recall in the early days, they were flaring away, right? And we, without telling us that they were flaring away. Right. So I think, listen, I believe that oil is a blessing and not a curse. Let me put that out there. And that we must use the oil resource to develop our country and set it on a path for economic stability for centuries, if possible. There are negative environmental effects that will come from oil production, but the EPA, our EPA must be staffed and empowered to ensure that those negative economic environmental effects, that they are minimized.
Right. What is your position on this issue of, let's say, windfall taxes that might arise from the conflict in the Persian Gulf? The price of oil is zoomed up. And, in other parts of the world, what happens is you have windfall taxes applied to significant revenues that oil companies earn. Would you be in favor of, let's say, if one can discuss that within the context of a change to the PSA, would you be in favor of applying taxes on the windfall profits that oil companies would make?
Let me deal with that broadly on the issue of renegotiation. I think they're all, because I believe, and I don't have the PSA at hand. I meant to have a read before I came on this program with you, but I believe there's a clause there that limits our ability to implement a windfall tax.
Well, the stability clause,
the stability clause, and there is a similar view about renegotiation of the contract. We've had various people talk about, I think, the president, contract sanctity, and we've had the American ambassador come out. I will treat with this. I have dealt with it before in a very limited way. I have said that the there might have been ways for us to renegotiate at least the tax aspect. In a way, at the point I pointed out that Exxon was paying taxes on earnings from Guyana's oil in the Bahamas. And there might have been ways to renegotiate that position. And these are we're entering very sophisticated financial issues here. But there might have been a way to renegotiate that so that we could benefit from some of those revenues rather than have the Bahamas benefit from Guyana's oil revenue, taxes on Guyana oil revenue that we don't get.
Right.
So I'm bringing, I like to describe myself as a businessman in politics. And as a businessman in politics, as a businessman, I don't think there's any contract that can be renegotiated.
Right.
If you and I enter into a business
Mm-hmm.
and the terms become onerous for me, I will never think that I can come back to Anand and say, hey, Anand, you know, let's have a talk about this. This is
Right.
not, this is not working out and so on.
Okay.
It happens every day. I had one of those major, on my business side, a major discussion bright and early Monday morning or Tuesday morning, one of those days. No, it had to be Monday morning, bright and early, because it was and amicably the matter was settled. So I do not understand why any government feels that they can't sit with Exxon and have a discussion about renegotiation.
Okay, and the PSA does contain a provision for changes as long as both sides agree. And surely there are conditions under which both sides can agree. And we have pointed out, the newspaper and others have pointed out, that when Exxon comes to you and says, I would like to have Platform 7, you, as the government, can easily say, well, okay, before we go to Platform 7, we need to improve our benefits. And we're not going to have a further discussion. And that would not be untoward, and that would not be seen to be unreasonable. So there are many levers that the government can use, except that it has not considered that. And that is something that is concerning, because you would think that they would use that to the benefit of the public.
I think we failed the voters, really. I think we failed the citizens of Guyana when we blankly ruled out the possibility of renegotiation or negotiations about going forward. I think it's a failure to the people of Guyana when we do so.
Okay, so listeners,
but that's a personal position. That is not. Right. It's not to be interpreted as an APNU position.
So listeners joining us, you're on OGGN's Oil Talk, the official podcast of OGGN. The show is being brought to you by the Oil and Gas Governance Network, and our guest here today is Terrence Campbell. So I did want to go through some of the gas to energy project, and you have discussed some of this before. And I wanted to know, in addition to the things that you said you've raised with the Prime Minister and others, one of the important committees in Parliament is the Natural Resources Sector Committee. And this, of course, might be the purview of Mrs. Solomon and so on. But it's a sort of thing where you can have committee hearings held on this natural gas project, this gas to energy project, the cost overruns, the uncertainty about when this 50% cut in tariffs will be there, the suitability of the company, all of those things can be examined. So there is a great interest in the ability of these committees to be set up, so that you and the rest of the APNU parliamentary delegation could be in a position to say, let's hold hearings on this project. Let's bring it into the public eye, and let's hear what the Prime Minister and everybody else has to say in Parliament and on record.
And yes, and I think that's where we started. I mean, I did address the Public Accounts Committee, but there is the Foreign Relations Committee, that ought to be meeting and discussing the maneuvering of I think the border question is one it's moving. We're seeing Delcy and Barbados and so on. Yes.
Two CARICOM countries wearing her brooch with Essequibo.
Exactly.
And that should never have allowed, we should never have allowed that to happen. And it's happened.
Exactly.
We have not asserted ourselves in CARICOM.
Right.
And this, redounds to that.
We are dependent on American support, but the Americans are obviously not as unhappy with Venezuela as they used to be. What are the impacts of this? So I've moved away from the discussion, but I've only used it to say that I only use that example to say that these committees are not functioning, and so we're not having that robust discussion about decisions and about policies and the path forward, because you're not going to get any minister to answer to the serious questions outside of Parliament. Even in Parliament, they often don't answer. You reference Ashley Singh saying that, we don't address anything on natural gas. I would say Ashley Singh does not address anything raised in Parliament. Because I'll give you an example. On numerous issues, we spoke to him, rising debt loads. We spoke to him about the Fiscal Transfers Act, an act that was passed when he was minister in 2013, which sets out a formula, but under which resources are shared with the region, and it's completely ignored. Right? So Parliament is the only place where you can possibly get the government to answer. There's no guarantee, but where you can possibly get the government to answer. And those committees, Parliament and its committees, are not functioning, and that leaves both the citizens, us as MPs, and the citizens, in a bad position, and an ill-informed position. It is not good for our democracy and good for our planet.
Okay, could you explain for me the difference in your role as the parliamentary leader and the role of Mr. Norton as the leader of the party? The bottom line is, do you have the freedom to make independent decisions on behalf of the party on parliamentary matters?
And you would forgive me if I use a business example. The PNC is the holding company, and I'm essentially running a business unit.
Ah, okay.
I might be the head of a business unit, but it would be unwise for me not to check in with the corporate chiefs, on major policy issues.
Right. Okay. When is the next PNCR Congress, and do you plan to run for leader of the APNU at that Congress?
I do not have any idea as yet when the next Congress will be held. And I have not given thought to running as leader because, as far as I know, we have a leader right now. So I'm not given thought of it.
Okay, right. Leader. You're playing very safe here. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. The party has held street parliament.
You're questioning something.
All right. Okay. So the party has held street parliaments. I noticed the turnout has not really been significant. What is the philosophy behind it, and or is there going to be some change? Are there other options available to the party here at this point?
I might disagree with you on the turnout being significant. These street parliaments are held in different locations, and the aim is to bring to discuss issues with the people locally. We're constantly tweaking the formula to have greater participation, whereby people ask us questions. So we're not a government, but we're there, and we're laying out things that are happening publicly, and the people have an opportunity to ask us. You don't expect to see 1,000 people at a street parliament, but I will say to you, politics has changed. Politics is not the politics. I have no idea how old you are on that, but politics is not the politics of when I was growing up.
Right.
People, there is massive attention being paid by way of social media to the street parliament. So you should not only look at the physical attendance at the parliament, but there are people who are paying attention via social media, and we constantly get calls. We need you to have a parliament in Port Kaituma. We need you to have a street parliament here. We need you guys to come here. So I will disagree with you that it's not.
All right. So I've been given the 2-minute warning here. So I'm going to try to run through quickly, but for the record, I'm sixth, so 2 years behind you. Since your declaration as head of the APNU delegation in Parliament, I'm just interested, have you reached out to ExxonMobil directly, or have they reached out to you to try to establish some sort of dialogue on oil and gas matters?
No.
Okay, let me ask then about the cost of living. People continue to complain about the impact of cost of living and the fact that the sharing of oil wealth is not trickling down to them. They're continuing to suffer. In the minute and a half remaining, what are APNU's plans to help to alleviate these deep pockets of poverty? You are in the opposition at the moment, but surely you can present ideas in Parliament.
So we have traveled. I've gone to almost every region since becoming a parliamentarian, or since entering politics, active politics, as opposed to being a commentator last July. And cost of living is the biggest issue that we face. On a personal level, I have advocated, amongst other things, the expansion of production in this country, so as to help lower prices. Interestingly, I just got a call from someone who asked about fuel prices and where they are, and we discussed, where market prices drives up. We discussed briefly the role of Guy Oil, which I appreciate as a regulator, helping to keep the others down. But I did end by saying to that person that the government has taken no steps to cushion the impact on this occasion of those rising prices. And though the rising fuel price flow into everything, rising fuel price will then lead to rising price of Bora, rising price of everything will go up with rising price. There is not a lot of fiscal space in the budget because they basically spent out most of the oil money that they could pull down. There was a little bit that was left there. Don't ask me the exact amount now. I'd have to go back and do the calculations. But I do believe that the government should come back to Parliament for us to address issues of bringing relief in terms of the cost of living to the people. But Parliament is an institution that the government seems to have forgotten exists.
All right. So I think we're going to have to leave it there. Terrence Campbell, thank you very much for coming on OGGN's Oil Talk. We hope to have you again in the future. You've been watching the OGGN Oil Talk, the official podcast of the Oil and Gas Governance Network. Thank you for joining us here tonight. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Gas Governance Network. Our guest today, we're very pleased to say, is Terrence Campbell, a business.
Want glowing, youthful skin? Discover the TL Brightening Serum.